Hi there, and welcome back to Revise the Right Way. Trying a slightly different format, so hopefully you like it. Today, in particular, I want to focus on The Handmaid's Tale, and to begin with, looking at the importance or the significance of the title itself. Now, you may or may not have already read the story. If you haven't read the story, I would suggest go and read the story and then come back, because I don't want to spoil things. I'm only going to do a short video here, but at the same time, it makes sense if you know what we're talking about. So when it comes to this story, pretty simple title, okay? But I'd like to focus initially on the importance of the word "the" in the title. Now, when you look at it, it suggests to the reader that something about this handmaid is really important. Now, whether that's because Margaret Atwood just wants us to know that this is the main character and therefore we treat her differently, or if something about the way that they treat the text, and I say text lightly because it's turned into a different format at the end, but the way that they treat it in a more reverential way suggests that this is an important thing that we should be seeing as almost like a historical document. Now, interestingly, the end of the title kind of counters that in some ways, because the word tale, like you can see here, it suggests this idea of like a fairy tale, like this is fictional, this is made up, this couldn't happen, right? But at the same time, if you look at the homophone tale, it suggests that this isn't something that's been left behind or behind you or physically it's attached, but it's dragging along, and maybe that could be something about society and the legacy that's been left behind. Now, it could be overall society, or it could be Offred's society and legacy. And when you think about it, what she's left behind is tied in quite nicely to what was left behind for her by the previous inhabitant of her room. And when you look at this, the fact that the previous inhabitant scrawls this message and has killed herself, we realise that she's kind of shared this room with the previous handmaid and maybe the previous ones, and etc, 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 as though the Handmaid's Tale is something passed down over time, and like an old-fashioned story that you pass on and you tell orally, but you can't do it here because they're not allowed to talk that much and they're not allowed to write things down. So the fact that the phrase "nolite te bastardes carborundarum," and I've probably horribly butchered that, I'm sorry, becomes like a short version of the whole story. She's trying not to let the bastards grind her down, but she still finds herself ground down by the system. It's not clear whether this means that corrupt governments and the system is beating her, or whether Atwood's just trying to make this idea that the whole situation, the whole premise is so scary and so awful. It's dystopian, but not in the way that something like 1984 is, exploring maybe a text that fixates on gender and on kind of regressing and looking at these old stereotypical views. It's an interesting premise and it's not clear, but I think it's one that you can explore further by exploring that short quote and thinking about how the message is passed down. And that's something I'm going to talk about finally in a moment. And finally, when talking about the title, I think it'd be remiss if I didn't at least allude to the fact that it does have this link to Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. And you probably heard of this if you look at any of these sites analysing the book. It talks about this idea that it's lots of stories about these group of people from different sections of society. Some are really rich and some are not so rich and seen in this prestigious manner. And it kind of fits into this kind of heritage of them telling their stories on the road and passing along those stories, which kind of fits in nicely with what I was saying before. Although they can't necessarily communicate in the same way, they find ways and means of passing on their stories. Now, what's interesting is we then find out in the past the ending, I suppose, is that the fictional transcription from these cassette tapes, and I've put here it references the labels on the cassette tapes, and the fact that A, that's something quite old-fashioned, and B, it's kind of referencing people like Boy George, Twisted Sister. And if you look at these people, it's kind of like the handmaids could be seen as Twisted Sisters, Boy George. If you look at the whole sexuality thing, Elvis Presley maybe pushing those taboos, etc. And it's interesting that it's given some kind of value by how they talk about it. There's lots of crudeness and then humour at the end, but basically it ties in nicely to this kind of idea of a story passed down through time. Obviously, there's lots of different ways of looking at the title, and I'm sure you've got your own ideas, which are excellent and equally valid. I'd love to hear them. Comment below, and obviously, Another thing I'd suggest is there's lots of really great resources on YouTube, on the internet, to analyse Handmaid's Tale. If you haven't checked out John Green's videos, you should really do so. They're great starting points. And also, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully this was helpful in getting you to think about the title. Next, we're going to focus on the significance of the name Offred, and I look forward to you joining me for that video. Thank you very much. Goodbye.